From the day Tony Abbott won the Liberal leadership in 2010, I knew it was bad news for Australia, simply because I could see he was a reckless, populist, conservative stuck in the 1950s, basically. But what struck me most was his mentality, his temperament. The reckless temperament that he walks around with, that chip on his shoulder, that basically says, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to wreck the place. Simple as that. And in my opinion, he is the most divisive leader since Federation. That I'm pretty much sure of. Now, when he lost the Prime Ministership, Tony Abbott promised, and I quote, "There will be no sniping, no undermining, because I have learnt from the previous government that division is death." Well, no, he hasn't learnt. And I remember back in 2013, or no, that was 2015 when that happened. And I remember thinking then at the time, Abbott cannot possibly keep his word on this, because he can't help himself. It's in his nature. It's his mentality. It's his temperament. And sure enough, he couldn't help himself. He's done nothing but undermine, snipe, talk back, be disloyal to the leadership, and leak against his own party, basically, all for his own ends. Once again, being reckless. And, well, yes, division is death. And right now, Tones is doing his very best to bring down his own government. And what's worse, this is bad for our democracy. It's bad for democracy because there's no debate on policy. There's no vision within the government. All it is just infighting and personal politics, so to speak, or personality politics would probably be a better word for it. And our political leaders wonder why out there in Voterland the people are disillusioned and disenchanted with politics. They've had enough. They've had gutful. Australia has so many issues facing it right now. I mean, just off the top of my head, we've got power prices going up 20% next month. That's insane. And meanwhile, we have a government in Canberra that's doing absolutely nothing but fight amongst themselves as to who should be leader, and fight amongst themselves as to whether we should be moderate conservatives or whether they should be far-right conservatives. Quite frankly, I don't care what conservative they are. Boot them out. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, the Labor opposition leader, Bill Shorten, he just has to sit back and do nothing, because as it stands, if Tony Abbott continues the way he's going, sniping and undermining and leaking against the government, he's going to do his best to bring down the government. It will bring him down, and they will get smashed at the next election, and Bill Shorten will be Prime Minister by default. And all we're doing then is just repeating exactly what happened from 2010 to 2013. Undermining and sniping. And back then, if you recall, people had basically said, well, I'm going to vote for Tony Abbott because it can't be any worse than the current mob. Well, if we get the same thing again, maybe it could, maybe it couldn't. But we can't keep doing the same thing. That's just silly. So really, Tony Abbott is becoming a problem within our democratic system. Everyone has a right to speak, and he has a right to speak as well. But he's undermining his own party, and that's not for me to decide. That's for the Liberal Party to decide. And yes, he's a Prime Minister. He's been a Prime Minister. He should be respected for that. But Tony Abbott was a very effective opposition leader. He was a very good attack dog. But when it came to government, he had no idea. He was incompetent. Everything he did had to be run by Peter Credlin. Anyone within the cabinet or the government had to run everything by Peter Credlin before Tony Abbott could make a decision. And when he wanted to make a decision, he had to run it by Peter Credlin. And ultimately, it brought down his prime ministership. And I hope we don't make the same mistake again. And the question we have to ask now is, if this infighting continues and Bill Shorten is to be the shoe-in as the next Prime Minister, is Bill Shorten and Labor ready to govern? Because we cannot continue down the path of more division should another Labor government get in power. And hopefully, if they do get in power, they won't be fighting. Because we can't afford to fight anymore. We need to have stable, strong leadership that is going to deal with the issues that we have. And we have a myriad of issues that nothing is being done about. We have a shrinking middle class. People are losing their penalty rates. Wages are basically flatlining. In fact, declining by relative standards. Housing affordability is ridiculous. No one can afford to buy anything. Power prices are going up 20%. And that's just a few of the things we have facing us. Oh, not to mention the NBN, that's a mess. We need a strong, stable government that will take us forward. We cannot afford another party of infighting, another government of infighting. Which takes me to what Christopher Pyne said the other day at his LGBTI function. The community function he had was for Liberal Party supporters. And all he said, he didn't say anything. He didn't do anything wrong. He basically just said that he was a firm believer of marriage equality, and he believed that the law would be passed through the Parliament probably sooner rather than later. What's wrong with that? He is at an LGBTI fundraiser, community event, sorry. He's not exactly going to turn around and say, oh, we're going to have the Australian people decide whether you should get married and have equality and equal rights. I don't think he's going to say that at a LGBTI community event function. So how is that being disloyal? He's just stating the case. And then on Q&A the other night, normally I don't give Christopher Pyne much credit, but credit where credit is due. I thought he spoke very well, and he gave the government's case. And he did nothing to be disloyal. The only person being disloyal is Tony Abbott. It's hypocritical, Tony Abbott calling Christopher Pyne disloyal, because Christopher Pyne is out there making the case for the government of the day. Tony Abbott is sitting on the backbench sniping and undermining and carrying on like a 5-year-old, having tantrums. Which leads me to Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, and the reason why Tony Abbott and the far right talked about wanting to bring it in was because of freedom of speech. Although we're talking about the Racial Discrimination Act, he wants to promote freedom of speech. Well, freedom of speech only if you agree with what Tony Abbott and the far right of the Liberal Party have to say, but if you're anyone else, then no, it's not freedom of speech. That's also hypocritical. But all in all, what we're seeing is more division, more infighting when we can least afford it. What we need is strong, stable, bold leadership that will take us forward and fix the problems that we have now, as well as giving some vision of what they think Australia can be and what we should be in the future. And we need to have that discussion, because if we don't, then we're going to find ourselves in deep trouble. Thank you all very much and good afternoon.